Isaac Singer died owning 24 homes across 3 continents, generated more passive income than oil barons, and left behind children so wealthy they married into European royalty, yet within 2 generations, his mansions were seized, his fortune vaporized, and his descendants were filing lawsuits against each other over furniture. That's not bad luck. That's what happens when you confuse revenue with structure. Most people think the sewing machine made Singer rich. It didn't. The sewing machine made him famous. What made him rich was inventing the installment plan, the first system that turned poor people into permanent debtors while calling it opportunity. Singer didn't sell machines. He sold monthly payments. And monthly payments, unlike products, generate cash flow that outlives the sale. That's why his income exceeded his competitors by multiples. He wasn't in manufacturing. He was in finance. But here's the part nobody teaches. Financial engineering that generates wealth doesn't automatically preserve it. The mechanisms that build empires are not the mechanisms that sustain them. And Singer's empire, which produced $40 million a year at its peak, collapsed not because it stopped making money, but because money, when distributed without structure, becomes a weapon against the people who inherit it. The Singer family mansion on Fifth Avenue wasn't just a home. It was a statement of permanence. 75 rooms. Imported marble. Private ballrooms. Staff quarters that housed 50 servants. The architecture screamed dynasty. But dynasties require more than architecture. They require legal clarity, operational succession, and heirs who understand that wealth is a responsibility, not an inheritance. The Singers had none of those things. Isaac Singer died in 1875 with 24 children from multiple relationships, no coherent will, and assets scattered across jurisdictions that didn't communicate. He believed his wealth was self-sustaining. That the company would run itself, the income would keep flowing, and his children would be protected by sheer volume of capital. He was wrong on all 3 counts. And if you think this is about one eccentric inventor, you're missing the structural pattern that destroys most fortunes. When Singer died, his estate didn't pass cleanly. It exploded into litigation. Multiple women claimed widow status. Children from different relationships contested legitimacy. Properties were claimed by entities in different countries operating under conflicting legal frameworks. The company continued generating revenue, but that revenue was immediately frozen by probate courts trying to determine who owned what. This is the first structural failure. Wealth without legal architecture doesn't simplify succession, it paralyzes it. Every asset becomes a contested claim. Every heir becomes a litigant. And every month of litigation drains the estate through legal fees, court costs, and frozen assets that can't be sold, leveraged, or reinvested. The mansion itself became a focal point of dispute. Multiple heirs claimed primary residence rights. Others argued it should be sold and proceeds distributed. Some wanted it held as a family seat. But because Singer never created a trust specifying succession, because he never designated decision-making authority, the mansion couldn't be transferred. It sat in legal limbo while property taxes accumulated, maintenance costs compounded, and the structure began to decay from neglect. Here's what makes this unbearable. The estate had more than enough money to preserve the mansion. The sewing machine company was still profitable. Royalties were still flowing. But liquidity and access are not the same thing. The money existed, but it was locked behind legal proceedings that took years to resolve. And during those years, the mansion went from asset to liability, because real estate doesn't wait for lawyers to finish arguing. The heirs weren't lazy. They weren't incompetent. They were trapped in a system designed to protect assets by freezing them, and freezing, by definition, prevents use. Wealth that can't be accessed has no functional value. It's just a number in a ledger that generates cost without producing benefit. If you're still watching, you're beginning to see why inheritance isn't the same as security. By the 1880s, the litigation had fragmented the family into factions. Some heirs hired their own attorneys and sued the estate administrators for mismanagement. Others formed alliances and tried to force asset sales. A few gave up entirely and accepted settlements just to escape the legal morass. Every action created counteractions. Every settlement created new disputes. The estate became a perpetual motion machine of conflict, fueled by the very wealth it was supposed to protect. And the professionals thrived. Estate attorneys billed by the hour, and the hours were infinite. Appraisers were hired to value properties that couldn't be sold. Accountants tracked income that couldn't be distributed. Every expert added complexity, and complexity justified more experts. The estate wasn't being managed, it was being strip-mined by the system designed to preserve it. This is the second structural failure. Large estates generate professional ecosystems that profit from dysfunction. Resolution ends billable work. Prolonged litigation sustains it. So the incentive structure rewards delay, not efficiency. And the longer the delay, the more the estate pays, and the less the heirs receive. The Singer Mansion on Fifth Avenue, which had been appraised at over $2 million in 1875, was eventually sold in 1896 for less than half that amount. Not because real estate values dropped, Manhattan property was booming. But because the legal entanglements, the years of deferred maintenance, and the cloud on the title made it toxic to buyers. Purchasers don't want lawsuits. They want clean transactions. And nothing about the Singer estate was clean. The buyer was a developer who planned to demolish the mansion and build commercial space. The family protested. Some heirs filed injunctions trying to block the sale. But by that point, the estate administrators had legal authority to act, because the courts had determined that continued holding costs exceeded any sentimental value. The mansion was a financial drain, and drains get closed. So the ballrooms where European aristocrats had danced were gutted. The marble staircases were sledgehammered. The servant quarters were torn down. The building that was supposed to anchor a dynasty was erased in less than 6 months, and the proceeds from the sale went directly into paying accumulated legal fees and back taxes. The heirs received almost nothing. But the company still existed. Singer Manufacturing was still one of the largest corporations in America. It still had factories, distribution networks, and patents generating royalties. So why didn't that wealth protect the family? Because corporate wealth and personal wealth are not the same thing. Isaac Singer owned shares in the company, but those shares were part of his estate, which meant they were frozen during probate. He couldn't vote them. His heirs couldn't sell them. The shares existed, but they were functionally useless until the legal disputes were resolved. And by the time they were resolved, the company had been restructured, new investors had diluted ownership, and the family's percentage had been reduced to minority status. This is the third structural failure. Equity in a company is not liquid wealth. It's contingent wealth. It only has value if you can sell it, and you can only sell it if you have clear title, and you only have clear title if the legal entity holding it isn't contested. When estates freeze equity, heirs don't inherit companies, they inherit lawsuits with uncertain outcomes. The Singer children who did eventually receive distributions found themselves cash-rich but system-illiterate. They had money but no understanding of how to preserve it. So they did what most sudden wealth recipients do. They spent it on lifestyle, status, and speculative investments that looked sophisticated but were structured to transfer wealth from the inexperienced to the professional. One son invested in a South American mining operation that promised 20% annual returns. The mine existed. The returns didn't. Another daughter financed a European railroad expansion that collapsed when the financing consortium withdrew. A third heir bought into a transatlantic shipping venture that went bankrupt within 2 years. Every investment looked legitimate. Every prospectus was professionally prepared. And every single one was designed to extract capital from people who had money but lacked expertise. This reveals the fourth structural failure. Wealth doesn't teach financial literacy. It attracts predators who specialize in separating the wealthy from their capital. The more money you inherit without understanding, the more vulnerable you become, because you look like a client but you're actually a target. The professional class that surrounds sudden wealth isn't there to educate you. They're there to monetize your ignorance. Investment advisors earn fees on transactions, not outcomes. Attorneys bill for time, not results. Accountants charge for complexity, not simplification. Everyone involved profits from your confusion, and no one profits from your independence. And the singers, who inherited one of the largest fortunes in America, were systematically harvested by experts who understood wealth management better than they ever would. If you've made it this far, you're watching something most people never see, the machinery that converts inheritance into extraction. By the early 1900s, the Singer family fortune had been largely dissipated. Some heirs still had money, but nothing approaching the original scale. The Fifth Avenue mansion was gone. The European properties had been sold. The company shares had been liquidated or diluted. What remained were individual inheritances managed by separate trustees, each operating independently, with no coordinated strategy or family governance. This fragmentation is critical to understand. When estates are divided without structure, families lose collective bargaining power. A unified fortune of 40 million can fund political influence, absorb market downturns, and attract top-tier expertise. But when that fortune is split into 40 individual inheritances of 1 million each, every heir is just another wealthy client, privileged but not powerful, comfortable but not influential. And comfortable clients don't command loyalty. They command fees. The psychological damage was worse than the financial loss. Isaac Singer's grandchildren grew up hearing stories about the mansion, the European estates, the aristocratic connections. They were raised with the identity of dynasty. But by the time they reached adulthood, that dynasty had been reduced to trust distributions and legal settlements. The gap between their inherited identity and their actual circumstances created a generation of people who felt entitled to wealth they no longer controlled. This is what happens when legacy is promised but structure is absent. People build their sense of self around an inheritance, and when that inheritance evaporates, they don't just lose money, they lose coherence. They become monuments to something that no longer exists, performing a role in a play that's already closed. Several of Singer's descendants tried to revive the family name through business ventures. One grandson launched a new sewing machine company, trading on the Singer brand, only to discover the trademark had been sold during probate and was now owned by competitors. Another descendant tried to write a family history, hoping to monetize the legacy, but found that most records had been destroyed or sealed in legal settlements. The empire that Isaac Singer built wasn't destroyed by failure. It was destroyed by success without succession. He created so much wealth that it became unmanageable. He fathered so many children that inheritance became litigation. He built so many properties that preservation became impossible. And the system that was supposed to protect all of it, estate law, probate courts, professional trustees, did exactly what it was designed to do. It preserved itself. It ran its processes. It collected its fees. And it distributed what remained according to legal priority, not human need or dynastic vision. The Singer Manufacturing Company continued to thrive. It expanded globally. It innovated product lines. It became one of the most recognized brands in the world. But the family that created it became a footnote. By the 1920s, most Singer heirs had no connection to the company. They didn't sit on the board. They didn't attend shareholder meetings. They received small dividend checks from trusts they didn't control, managed by professionals they'd never met. This is the final structural failure. Corporate success doesn't equal family legacy. A company can thrive while the founding family disintegrates, because companies are legal entities optimized for survival, and families are biological entities vulnerable to conflict, ignorance, and time. Isaac Singer thought building a successful company meant building a dynasty. But companies and dynasties operate under different rules. Companies have boards that enforce governance. Families have emotions that resist it. Companies can fire incompetent leadership. Families can't disown heirs. Companies can raise capital by diluting ownership. Families experience that dilution as betrayal. Singer built a company that could survive him. He didn't build a family structure that could. If this is changing how you understand wealth, you're seeing what the system doesn't want you to see. The remnants of the Singer fortune continued to circulate through the American upper class for decades, but in increasingly diluted form. Great-grandchildren received trust distributions that paid for private schools and comfortable retirements, but nothing approaching the original scale. Some married into other wealthy families, merging their diminished inheritances with declining fortunes from different industries, a kind of aristocratic hospice care where old names shared resources to maintain appearances. Others left wealth entirely. A few Singer descendants became academics, artists, or middle-class professionals, deliberately distancing themselves from a legacy that had become more burden than benefit. They changed their names, avoided family reunions, and built identities independent of an inheritance that had taught them wealth attracts parasites and family breeds litigation. By the 1950s, when researchers tried to track the Singer family tree for historical records, they found fragmentation so complete that many descendants were unaware of their connection to the fortune. The dynasty that Isaac Singer assumed would last centuries had atomized in less than 75 years. And the Fifth Avenue mansion, which was supposed to be the physical anchor of that dynasty, had been replaced by a commercial building that most New Yorkers walked past without knowing a family empire had once stood there. This is what impermanence looks like at scale. Not dramatic collapse. Just quiet replacement. The city moves on. The property changes hands. And the only people who remember are historians excavating legal records that no one reads. The lesson here isn't about better estate planning, though that would have helped. It's about the fundamental incompatibility between human ambition and systemic reality. Isaac Singer wanted to build something eternal. But eternity requires maintenance, and maintenance requires structure, and structure requires heirs who understand their role as custodianship, not consumption. The Singer children understood themselves as beneficiaries. They believed the wealth existed to serve them. And in that belief, they guaranteed its destruction, because wealth that serves individual appetite disappears. Only wealth that serves systemic function survives. The sewing machine company survived because it served a function. It produced goods people needed at prices they could afford. The family fortune disappeared because it served no function beyond enriching people who hadn't earned it and didn't understand it. And the system that managed that transition, estate law, corporate governance, professional wealth management, worked exactly as intended. It didn't preserve the family. It preserved the wealth's functionality. It moved capital from incompetent hands to competent institutions. It redistributed resources from consumption to production. From the system's perspective, the Singer family dissolution wasn't failure. It was optimization. If you're still watching, you understand something most people spend their lives avoiding: that wealth is not yours, even when it's in your name. The final irony is that Isaac Singer's actual innovation, the installment plan, became the dominant model of American consumer capitalism. Every car loan, every mortgage, every credit card is a descendant of Singer's system. He created a mechanism that turned products into perpetual payment streams, and that mechanism is now the foundation of the global economy. But while his invention became immortal, his family became irrelevant. The system he pioneered outlived him, enriched millions of people he never met, and generated trillions in economic activity he never saw. His personal fortune, which seemed so vast, was just a rounding error in the larger mechanism he'd triggered. And that's the real lesson. Individual wealth is temporary. Systems are permanent. If you want legacy, build systems. If you build wealth without systems, you're just building a target. The Singer mansion is gone. The fortune is dispersed. The family is fragmented. But the installment plan lives on, embedded in every transaction, teaching the same lesson Singer never learned, that the people who design the system matter more than the people who win within it. And most people never design anything. They just inherit, spend, and disappear. If this changed how you see inheritance, share it with someone still planning their dynasty. The few Singer descendants who remain aware of their lineage carry a peculiar burden. They inherit the name but not the empire, the identity but not the infrastructure. Some have tried to reclaim the narrative, writing memoirs or launching businesses that trade on the Singer brand, only to discover that nostalgia doesn't generate revenue and historical connection doesn't command respect. One great-great-granddaughter attempted to trademark Singer Heiress for a lifestyle brand in the 1990s, marketing luxury goods with supposed family provenance. The venture collapsed within 18 months, not because the products were poor, but because consumers don't pay premium prices for diluted lineage. Heritage without power is just storytelling. And storytelling without substance is marketing that fails. What remains of the Singer fortune today exists primarily in legal casebooks and business school curricula, cautionary tales about succession failure and wealth fragmentation. The family that was supposed to define American aristocracy became a teaching example of what not to do. Their mansions are photographs in archives. Their wealth is a historical footnote. And their name, once synonymous with innovation and empire, is now just a logo on sewing machines manufactured by corporations that have no connection to the family whatsoever. The dynasty ended. The brand survived. And that tells you everything about what actually matters in capitalism.